Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, listeners. My name is Leslie Morse. I'm delighted to be a guest host here today on the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I am joined by Matt from Quantum Detectors, and you're going to get to learn a little bit more about him and all of the amazing things that he is doing related to Agile and Scrum and hardware and software all pulled together. So I think it's going to be a really great conversation. Hey, Matt, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
I am well. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast episode. I'm excited to talk about quantum detectors and the work that you all do. Not only is it fascinating from just an industry perspective, but it's also the story of Scrum and agility related to hardware, which is something we don't get to talk about as much as I think we'd like to as Agilists. So thank you for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I just want people to go ahead and start off by learning a little more about you. So tell us some about your professional background, specifically how you found Scrum.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career as an apprentice, so I've kind of worked from the bottom, if you like. My training is in electronics, so that's kind of what I studied in and what my initial roles were all about, so hardware related. As my career developed, I started getting involved with the wider part of the product, so that would be both mechanics and software and firmware, things like this. And then eventually leading to now where I'm at Quantum Detectors, looking after the whole product. My journey with Scrum and Agile might be typical of most people in hardware. It was a big buzzword, in a lot of companies and a lot of people saying these things. And at this time, it's been used in software for quite a bit, and it was reasonably well understood. But in hardware companies, this buzzword led to some bad practices. So in previous companies, we've had managers trying to implement Agile. It was just called Agile, not Scrum. And it was normally just, oh, well, we have daily stand ups and that's Agile, or we have sprints and that's Agile. And that was my initial experiences of Scrum. And so when I went to Quantum Detectors, I was responsible for a larger portion of the product, and I was with a fresh team and a fresh company. We're a spin out company, so we're still reasonably young. And it was a great opportunity to try things. And we've got a very sort of experimental mindset at Quantum Detectors. So when I joined, I was like, hey, this agile Scrum thing looks quite good. Can I give it a go? And I managed to convince management to give us a trial and experiment. So we trialed it for 3 months on one product. And then at the end of those 3 months, we had great results. So I just kept expanding and extending the test until now the whole R&D department is working in Scrum in an agile fashion.
That's really cool. And the thing that fascinates me the most, Matt, about that narrative is that it sounds like your first exposure to Scrum was kind of very superficial and mechanical, not what we talk about as Scrum.org related to professional Scrum. So what about your own personal experience even led you to want to go at it again once you were at Quantum Detectors?
Because I see things not working and it frustrates me. So when you're working with new products, things that haven't been made before, there's often a lot of innovation and creativity that has to go into it. And especially with highly technical products as well, there's another complexity of, introducing risk and uncertainty. And traditional project management is just really hard work with those things because we never know what we don't know. And Agile is supposed to be this thing that can deal with complex environments and complex products. And so it was always in the back of my mind of something we should be doing. And whilst I had that sort of bad initial exposure, if you like, I thought, well, I'm sure we could be doing this better. And this chance to experiment and try and adapt as we go along was great, and we've kind of had to learn as we go because there's not much information out there in applying this to hardware, which has a lot of unique challenges with it.
Yeah, for sure. And so we'll dig into that story because I think I I'm just very impressed that you had the persistence to like try because there's so many people that have kind of gotten a bad taste in their mouth that it's hard to turn the ship around. So you're like, this is supposed to work. I believe it can work. So let's really dig into the details of that and start with just like, you know, more about quantum detectors. Like, talk to us about the business. Like, we know there's that blend of hardware and software, but what's really your core business and why you exist?
Yeah, so quantum detectors essentially wants to be the fuel for scientific discovery. We make detectors which you can think of as high-speed cameras for special applications. Um, we want to sort of make cutting-edge technology more accessible to scientists, and therefore fuel the scientific discovery, and find new materials, find cures for things. So all of our products are geared towards that science. We've got a range of products, mostly split into two categories. One is X-ray, and another is electron microscopy. For those that don't know what electron microscopy is, if you think of a really powerful microscope, it's essentially that rather than using light to look at things really small, we use electrons. So we fire electrons and it goes through a material, and it means that you can image things about 1,000 to 10,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. So you can really see the structure of these materials, and this is what the scientists are using to develop new materials and learn and study more about what the existing sort of materials that we have today.
Well, it's like, talk about the ability to change the world, getting more of that technology into scientists' hands. Um, that is the epitome of the Scrum.org mission statement, right? Helping people and teams solve complex problems. Scientists
Yeah.
are out there solving complex problems, and now you're solving the complex problems of the tools those people need in order to succeed. This is complexity upon complexity upon complexity. So no wonder you were looking for something outside of kind of that traditional uh, delivery management sort of approach. Earlier, you said you were kind of leading or over product there. Tell us a little bit more about like your exact role and what you're accountable for.
So I'm employed as the lead detector engineer at Quantum Detectors. We have a range of products on sale at the moment and in development, not yet released. One of the things with hardware is that we tend to have more products on the go at the same time. So there's a bit of extra complexity and management there. I look after most of the research and development team. The research and development team, the people that come up with these great innovative ideas and help develop the products and release them to market. We also have various other teams that support us and that support the business. Um, and everyone's really intelligent. We've got a great bunch of really bright individuals. And because of that, we've managed to sort of overcome really difficult obstacles and create really simple products from complex needs.
That's there's so many things that I'm curious about just related to the nature of how your product development life cycle works in terms of customer discovery around what their needs are, and then the iterative process of even coming up with a viable solution you might want to turn into a product. That is not the purpose of today's podcast, though. Today's podcast is really the application of, right, Scrum in this hardware environment. I do think we should talk to you about that other stuff in the future, though. The the earlier you talked about, like, I wanted to go back and revisit Scrum and Agile ways of working because like stuff wasn't working.
Mm.
And things were harder than they needed to be. What was it that was hard, or what was it that wasn't working that led you to proposing Scrum as a different way of working?
I guess the simplest form is that we were always wrong. We're still wrong, um, but we would formulate a plan for developing a small piece of the product, and then inevitably halfway through the development we would find some issue, or some issue would happen to us, and it would involve tearing up the whole plan and starting again. That could happen multiple times in a project, and this leads to the product being late, and over budget, and not necessarily meeting what the customer needs are, and it sort of builds upon itself. So it, it takes you to take a step back to find out what's happening. If you're in the detail, it's too easy just to be consumed by perfectionism, or consumed by getting accurate plans. And so Agile really helped us, or Scrum really helped us to step back and take a look at the product rather than the project, if you like, and look at the customer needs and how we can maximize the value for them rather than for us.
Yeah, they sound like the same sort of classic challenges lots of other organizations face as well. And the thing that I heard coming through the most from you was really a shift left in learn earlier,
Yeah.
and uncovering those big rocks earlier in order to avoid waste and increase quality, which are right classic sort of things. But I love that you kind of led with the learning first, because so many other people would lead with well, we want to get faster time to market for customers having products in their hands, or efficiency and more kind of classic business sort of things. But the fact that you were coming at it from a learning perspective just tells me that your culture was probably already primed for this uh, alternate way of working, more so than maybe others. Would you agree with that assumption I'm making?
Yeah, so half of our company is full of scientists, and if you think of the scientific method, it's all very much, well, hypothesis, method, experiment, conclusion. So half the company are already primed, if you like, to sort of work in an experimental way. The other thing is that we've got a great bunch of people working for us, and they've all kind of got this growth mindset, which is really critical, I found, for uh, new ways of working and in complex environments. So when I suggested the idea, there wasn't really any pushback, if you like, other than establishing the boundaries of the experiment. Everyone was on board and gave it their full attention and their full effort, which is great because, as you said, other companies might look towards command and control and first, and
Yeah.
that way it's harder to sort of to go in with this.
Yeah. Now, were there concrete sort of business measures or value indicators that you were looking towards, that these things need to improve through our use of Scrum? Were you able to be empirical in the use of Scrum?
So we try to be empirical where possible, but it's always really challenging to do that because some of the numbers, some of the metrics are based on feelings, so they become slightly less empirical. You might have a number, but if it's just someone's opinion, then I won't say what's the point, but it's a lot harder to keep track of. But we definitely had targets of we need to become quicker at delivering things and quicker at delivering to the customer. um, when I say deliver quicker to the customer, what we really mean is deliver some value to the customer sooner. So we might not deliver the whole product to the customer. We might find some users that are really keen to try out the latest tech, and they'll be happy to put up with quirks, and they'll be happy to try, little experiments with us rather than receiving the whole thing. So yeah, we definitely looked at delivering value sooner, and we've hopefully delivered on that as we've gone through.
Yeah, when it's there, I'm resisting an urge to talk more about how you defined the boundaries of getting started with Scrum and that sort of let's do an experiment to see if this works for us sort of thing. Because you said something I think really important there is getting value, some value, even if not the entire product, into the customer's hands early, and really taking advantage of your customers that are the first movers around new technology. And this is where I haven't had the luxury of really directly engaging in Scrum in hardware sort of situation. So my brain starts to hurt. I'm like, well, given the fact that you're giving people like X-ray technology and advanced microscope technology, but given that you're dealing with the hardware of these kind of products, how are you breaking down into those incremental chunks of value with hardware involved?
This is probably the biggest challenge that we've faced in the hardware world, because with software, it's typically really modular, and there's typically low cost associated with delivering software. If we took sort of hours labor out of the equation, software is typically low cost and can be delivered in small chunks. Hardware is, by virtue of the fact it's physical, a lot more expensive to make and deliver. It's also highly integrated. So whilst we attempt to modularize a lot of the things, and that's a real key thing for us, is that if you can separate functions and make it modular, then it becomes a bit more independent, and you could perhaps deliver that module independently, or even if it's not got much value on its own, it at least means that you can develop quicker because you can work on other modules in parallel, or you can stop and start modules and develop them at your own pace. But when it comes to the customer, we've had to look at alternatives to the full product in terms of gathering feedback and delivering some value. So we might develop a simulator that simulates the operation of our camera, and then deliver that software to them and say, well, look, our camera could do this sort of thing. What do you think of the user interface? Or we might make a very low performance version of the hardware and go, hey, look, this is the new technology. It doesn't have all the performance that you need, but it's got this new feature XYZ that we think is really good. Can you give it a try? And so that's how we've managed to deliver some value early. And we really have to sort of say thank you to the early adopters to take this on, because they're taking a big risk and in time and sometimes money as well to try these new things. But the benefit for them is that they're they're the leading the technology. They're at the cutting edge, so they might be able to say find that scientific discovery first. So that's the motivation we find for them.
Yeah, and so it's Scrum in that iterative product discovery, almost like, is this even the product we want to take to market? More so than the get the product in market and incrementally improve it once it's existing. And I'm contrasting that on purpose, because I think so many of us are like, how do we get some version of the product out there to everybody, and then tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. And that doesn't sound like that's possible in quite the same way. It's like, here's an early version of what this product might be like, iterating through that, and then that becomes the thing that you do more of the full release around. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. So yeah, there's, as you said, it was about the product discovery and then also the delivery. So you're right. We kind of covered the product discovery side, and in terms of delivery, we can, or we have released products, and then we do iterate and re-release things. But we have to be very careful because there's a lot of cost associated with it, especially with the equipment that we sell. um, is that if you release an early version, if you sell an early version to someone, and then 6 months later their friends get the newer version, they're like, hey, I paid all this money, and why does my friend get a better version? So we kind of have to really plan our releases carefully. We do iterate after we release, and I think you'll find, if you look closely, most other hardware companies do this. If you look at cars, there's normally like a facelift version, or there's little reliability tweaks that nobody knows about. So companies do this, but it's not as obvious. But you're right, we have to be careful about our release management and our release planning, because we don't want to upset customers that are out of pocket because they're the early ones. So we might deal with that by having a friendly arrangement of upgrading people, or some other methods. It really depends on product to product.
Yeah. You've subtly touched on something else that I was curious about, which was your use of the word modular. And you were talking about kind of the overall low cost of software in the grand scheme of things. Um, and it's easy to do that if your software is architected with like, actual good architecture principles that allow you to do things in modular ways. Is there an approach that you're considering for that in the actual hardware aspect of it as well? And I'm coming at this from a very layman's terms. It's like, yeah, the core of the X-ray stays the same, but there is this component that they could like take out and replace with a newer one in order to more iteratively enhance and upgrade the technology of those core products, because that's an entirely different product architecture strategy from a hardware perspective as well.
Yeah, so we do try to modularize things where possible, but there's always this balance because if you're going for, 100% performance, then if you modularize a product, then you are accepting that some performance features aren't as good as they can be. And the trade off there is that whilst it might not be as good as it can be, you're saving a lot of time in effort and development time because it's got a standard known interface. It can be done in parallel, it could be upgraded later, all these sorts of things. So we have to be careful where we make those splits, because if we make the split or the module in the wrong area, then you get stuck in a situation where you need this extra 1% performance, and you can't get it without integrating it with the wider thing.
Yeah.
um, the other thing with physical and hardware products is that some things will just be incompatible. So we do modularize where possible, and we try to make logical splits, but there's not like 50 modules. There's a handful of them, because of that reason.
That completely makes sense. And so this is just an example of one of those things y'all had to think about as seeking to get value in the customer's hands early. What were some of those other kind of gnarly challenges that you had to navigate as you were seeking to use Scrum with these teams for the first time?
So I guess another common misconception that everybody has is that you have to release something every sprint, and in hardware that's no exception. But it's really the challenge is getting over the mindset that everybody has, is that you have to release something, or not even release something. You have to have some working version of your product every sprint. And whilst we endeavor to do that as much as possible, with hardware that's just not going to happen. If you've got a small team, which we are, then you've got a finite resource. So every sprint we produce value, but some sprints might be a design iteration that's a bit closer to being a complete product. Some sprints might be the full working thing that we could share with a customer. But it's really that mindset of how can we break down these tasks small enough that we can work on them, and how can we break them down such that we get the most value out of it each sprint.
Yeah, having that increment that you can get feedback on that is potentially valuable, right?
Yeah.
For the customer. So then what does sprint planning look like in terms of choosing those sprint goals in order, because I'm sure that your ability to do that well has changed over time. So what is that piece of the journey then?
Yeah, so sprint goals are an interesting one. I guess we've got a controversial opinion about those. um, because with hardware, what we found with sprint goals was that they were becoming um, really difficult to formulate. Whilst we could easily come up with a sprint goals, a lot of the ones would be, oh, complete X, Y, Z by the end of the sprint, and that's not really a good sprint goal.
Mm-mm.
And the challenges that we have is because you've got people from different domains, and we're a cross-functional team, but one person in the team has, let's say, electronics experience, another person has software experience, another person has mechanical. And whilst everyone has a good appreciation of the skills involved that and the craft that other people have, I can't say to the software engineer, right, now you go and design this, mechanical enclosure. And I can't say to the mechanical engineer, oh, can you just design this new circuit for XYZ? So because we've got all those domains in the same sprint, it becomes really challenging to have a cohesive sprint goal. So we've now moved towards product goals. So we have a product goal that is slightly longer term, and we can all focus on that and work towards that. We also use sprint goals if possible, but that's fewer and farther between the more we sort of go on this journey.
And so I imagine that looks a little more like, what is the most important thing we can do this sprint that gets us closer to our product goal?
Yes.
And that's kind of what that conversation shapes up as. And so is it potentially maybe that everybody's working on again, this would not be a traditional professional Scrum sort of answer, but like multiple increments that you're getting feedback on, because some of them might be more software based and others might be more like designing a portion of the hardware component?
Yeah, so we get feedback every sprint, but the feedback might be just internally. So we might,
Hmm.
review the increment internally. When it's more usable, then it goes to the customer, because then they can get some value out of that. Um, yeah, whilst it's not traditional, you're right. We do sort of increment towards the product goal. So I guess some of our product goals are slightly shorter term than other companies. But that's the way that we've had to deal with things. Otherwise, it falls into chaos, because it's just a collection of tasks that become the sprint goal, and that's
Yeah,
not
no,
that valuable.
no, it's not. It's not. So you started all of this learning initially happened through like the boundaries of one sort of experiment. That experiment went well enough that you have scaled Scrum to larger portion of the organization. So like how much of the work that you're doing now is rooted in Scrum?
So at the moment, the whole of the R&D department is using Scrum, or I won't say our version of Scrum. We're using Scrum for hardware as best we can, and that spawned out of that initial first experiment. So that's really good. What we're now looking to do is slowly bringing other parts of the company, or if it's not appropriate, how do we interface with other parts of the business? Because we're primarily delivering physical products, some areas of the business, it might not be appropriate for them to work in the Scrum framework. It might be more efficient for them to work in other ways. So for those departments, it's how do we interface with them better, and for other departments, it's how can we bring you in sooner to our process so that we can work together better.
And through this journey, are you learning faster than you were before? Because that was one of your key objectives.
Definitely, definitely. We've learned a lot, since we started, and I think it's easy to forget how far you've come. When you're just looking sprint to sprint, you see incremental improvements, but when you stop to think about, actually, 2 years ago we were in this position and now we're here, it's a big change.
What are some of those things that you're really celebrating when you look back over that time period?
One of the things we now find is that we're looking at smaller and smaller problems. So you might get a moan from someone about, this thing's broken, how can we do this thing better, and that becomes a bit all encompassing, because that's the biggest problem that we have. But when you look back, you think, actually, these problems are minor compared to what we're having. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is that we're now looking at smaller and smaller problems, and that we're having better quality conversations far more frequently. In the past, and particularly with older management frameworks, those conversations wouldn't be happening often enough,
Yeah,
and that leads to sort of issues that we touched on earlier.
yeah. And do your customers notice the earlier value delivery?
I hope so. So we always have the customers that we work with are always really excited. We always get positive feedback with our products, and I think they enjoy feeling part of the process a little bit, because they'll be the first people to have this new product or this new feature, they're always really keen to try it and share it amongst their peers. So we always get good feedback from them.
Yeah. You've talked about wanting to integrate other areas of the business in those interfaces in new and different ways. What else is sort of on the horizon, and what does the future of Scrum look like at Quantum Detectors?
So one thing that we're still figuring out is production. So we have a production team, a production department, and one of the interesting questions I'm battling with internally in my own mind is how agile do we want to be in some areas like production? So in previous places, some of the products that I worked on, we would sell hundreds of thousands of those products every year, and we had multiple products. So that for those types of mass produced products, they need a strong process and quite tight controls to ensure consistency and quality. um, if you introduce agile into things like that, it becomes a bit of an overhead. However, if the company or if the product benefits or values from incremental delivery, then perhaps you want more agile methodologies in your production environment. So I guess we're still figuring out how much we want in there and what works best. I think the main thing is that we'll continually learn and develop. I think that's the most important thing over Scrum and Agile in itself, is that just make sure that we keep improving. If we can make lives a little bit better every time, then that's good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a good higher calling. Like, we just want to make things better. And if that commitment to continuous improvement is there, that's the real driving force that you need to try things differently
Yeah.
every single time. Yeah.
Yeah.
What recommendations would you give people that are struggling with even how to get started thinking about Scrum related to hardware?
So I went on a long struggle to find information and to find people that have done this, because when you do some research on this, there's not many people that have done this. Or more accurately, I think what's happening is quite a few people have done this. They're just not talking about it. It's either becoming some trade secret, or perhaps they've got some secret source that nobody else is aware of. But I really struggle to find good examples of what Scrum looks like with hardware, because the typical things that you'll find are misinformed, and that leads to bad habits. So I would really encourage people to reach out and find companies and people that have already been on this experience and to go speak to them, because there are a lot of companies that do use Scrum or other agile practices with hardware, and you will get the best value from speaking to those people.
I've even heard that there's going to be a Scrum or Agile in Hardware conference in Europe in later 2024. So, like, people keep their eyes open for that. That might be a good place to go and learn from each other around all of this. Because I imagine it's hard to find your tribe, right? When you go look for software really, or you go look for Scrum related resources and content, so much is software related. That tribe is huge. But
Yeah.
this tribe is a little bit more niche. So are there, in that regard, are there specific like resources and tools that have been super useful for you that you want to recommend to others?
Yeah, so I guess I have been on Scrum.org training and I have found it valuable. But honestly, I would recommend to take on some proper Scrum training initially, and go in with a clear mindset. Forget what product you're making, just accept what you're being told, and then just try and be open with it, and try and read deeper into the values and the why behind Scrum, because if you're focusing on the mechanics, it's not going to work. When we talk about delivering an increment, if you read it on face value, you might just go, "Oh, I have to deliver a physical product every sprint," and again, that's not possible. But reading into it, you think, "Oh, actually, customers value this other thing, or internally we value this part of the design being done," and so it's taking some time to really delve into the why behind Scrum, why it was developed, and why certain
Like the
rituals,
events,
events.
like
That's it.
why
Yeah.
the events really are there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Why the events are there, because once you understand that, it becomes much easier to apply it to your situation for the hardware, your physical product. And like everybody, it's going to be slightly unique. Your
Yeah.
company has a unique product, hopefully, and a unique setup that might be slightly different to how other hardware companies work and have. So it's it's making sure that you can tweak Scrum to your needs, but still keeping the same values and ethos behind it.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So, Matt, as we wrap up, I've got kind of two sides of the coin around sort of the same question. One of the best ways to learn is by to get stuff fabulously wrong. So when you think back over this journey with quantum detectors and getting started with Scrum, what is one thing that just did not go well that you're like, man, I wish I could go get a redo on this one, and this is what I learned from that experience?
I think the sooner that you can have the correct view of Scrum, the better, because if you've got an incorrect perception of things, then you might not ever even start the journey. And so I would really sort of try and do that sooner. Some of the things that we've had wrong, you know, getting the sprint length right, and making sure the right people are involved. We might have developed this great thing at the end of the sprint, and then, oh, actually we didn't tell anyone about it, so it's a bit wasteful. Like, the customer didn't know it was there, or the stakeholders weren't informed of what was going on. So it was a wasted effort, if you like. So we definitely had that type of experience in the early days.
Yeah, Scrum for the sake of your own gratification versus Scrum to really drive the learning and empiricism that it's there to serve.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And I think that empiricism is a key word for us, because things are expensive in hardware. People don't want to make things that often. So one things that we found really valuable was to, with empiricism in mind, is that if you don't know which design choice to make, well, can we make a prototype? Can we physically make something and validate it one way or the other? Or can we simulate something to prove it right or wrong?
yeah. That getting further down the truth curve
Yes.
as quickly as you can, it sounds like. All right. So the other side of the coin is like what you talked a little bit about being proud of things that you'd been able to accomplish. But I want like looking back on the whole thing, like what are some of your big celebrations?
So I think I'm really proud of our team and our department, because without them, the experiment wouldn't have happened at the beginning. We wouldn't have continued working in this way, and who knows what position we'd be in and what would have happened. But I'm really proud of our team getting on board and to take a bit of ownership in terms of driving the improvements, and enjoying the process as well. We try to have fun with it where possible and celebrate the mistakes and things like this. The thing I'm most proud of is my team and quantum detectors to sort of support this and to get this going, because without that we wouldn't even be sat here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And without that, without those people, you wouldn't have products to give to your customers either, right? It's
Exactly.
all of this, companies are artificial constructs, right? We really are groups of people doing amazing things with each other. And it sounds like you've got a great group around you. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you to my team. I would also like to thank our CTO and the rest of the leadership team in supporting my group. Without them, this journey would have been much harder.
Matt, I really have enjoyed getting to know you and a little more about quantum detectors today. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and listeners, we hope you have gotten some amazing things to take away from this discussion as well. Thanks for tuning in.